For my 32nd birthday, my grandmother gave me a $76 million hotel. After the dinner, my mom arrived with her new husband, Preston, demanding that we manage it together as a family. I looked them in the eye and said, "Absolutely not. I am the only owner." My mom retorted, "Then pack your bags and leave this house immediately." Just then, Grandma chuckled from her wheelchair and unveiled another surprise that would bring them to their knees. Before I tell you how I dismantled their greed piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Amara, and at 32 years old, I was the chief operating officer of the Royal Savoy, one of Chicago's most historic Black-owned hotels. But tonight, inside the penthouse suite, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and waitstaff holding silver trays, I felt less like an executive and more like an intruder. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and betrayal. This was supposed to be my birthday party, but my stepfather Preston had turned it into his own personal networking event. Preston was a 55-year-old mediocre real estate agent who had married my mother Valerie 3 years ago. Since then, he had been slowly chipping away at the legacy my grandmother Estelle had built from the ground up during the civil rights era. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the snow fall over the city, trying to keep my composure. I wore a tailored emerald green dress that cost more than Preston's car, but he still looked at me like I was the help. I watched him across the room laughing loudly with a group of potential investors, his hand resting possessively on my mother's lower back. My mother Valerie looked beautiful but fragile, constantly scanning Preston's face to ensure she was smiling at the right moments. She had always been like that, desperate for validation, especially from men who treated her like an accessory. Preston clinked his spoon against his champagne glass, silencing the jazz band. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate my stepdaughter Amara." He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Come here, Amara, don't be shy." I walked toward the center of the room, keeping my head high. I expected a toast to my hard work. After all, I had doubled the hotel's revenue in the last 2 fiscal quarters. I had modernized the booking system and secured the contract for the mayor's gala. But Preston had other plans. He wrapped a heavy arm around my shoulder, squeezing a little too tight. "You know, folks, Amara here is a spirited girl. She helps out around the hotel doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Mostly administrative fluff, but we keep her busy, don't we, Val?" My blood ran cold. Administrative fluff. I was the COO. I ran this building. But I didn't say a word. I just forced a smile for my mother's sake. Preston reached under the table and pulled out a box wrapped in shiny gold paper. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said, handing it to me. "I know you have been playing pretend businesswoman for a while now, but I wanted to get you something that speaks to your true talents." I took the box. It was heavy. My heart hammered in my chest. Maybe it was a plaque. Maybe it was the deed to the office suite I had been asking for. I tore open the paper. The room went silent. Inside the box was a red and white checkered apron and a set of cheap kitchen knives. I stared at it, confused. Preston laughed, a deep belly laugh that echoed off the marble walls. "I know how much you people love your soul food cooking," he said loud enough for the investors to hear. "And honestly, sweetheart, the kitchen is where a woman really shines." Leave the complex business numbers to the men, right? The insult was so sharp it felt physical. "You people." He had just reduced my MBA and my decade of executive experience to a racial stereotype in front of 50 of Chicago's elite. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend me, waiting for her to tell her husband that her daughter was a business tycoon, not a line cook. But Valerie just laughed. It was a high, nervous sound. "Oh, Preston, you are terrible," she giggled, touching his arm. "Say thank you, Amara. It is a lovely, thoughtful gift." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the box. "Thank you, Preston," I said, my voice flat. "It is exactly what I expected from you." He missed the sarcasm completely. "You are welcome, kiddo. Now go put that in the kitchen and grab me another scotch. I turned to walk away, humiliated, burning with a rage so hot it threatened to melt the ice in the champagne buckets. But before I could take a step, a sharp metallic sound cut through the room. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a spoon hitting a glass, but with a rhythm that demanded absolute silence. Everyone turned. Sitting in the corner in her vintage wheelchair was my grandmother Estelle, Big Mama. For the last 2 years she had been quiet, letting everyone believe old age had dulled her sharp mind. Preston and Mom treated her like a piece of furniture, dusting her off when they needed to look like a loving family. Grandma Estelle lowered her spoon. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her eyes behind her gold-rimmed glasses were clear and focused. "Hand me that microphone, Preston," she said. Her voice was raspier than it used to be, but it still held the command of a woman who had marched with Dr. King. Preston rolled his eyes but walked over and handed her the mic. "Make it quick, Estelle," he muttered. "We have dessert coming." Grandma ignored him. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the investors, then on my mother, and finally resting on me. "For 50 years," she began softly, "the Royal Savoy has been a sanctuary. My late husband and I built this place when other hotels wouldn't let us through the front door. We built it with sweat, blood, and dignity." She paused, taking a breath. Everyone in the room leaned in. "I have watched this hotel change," she continued, "and I have watched my family change. I have seen hard work, and I have seen arrogance." Preston shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Okay, Estelle, that is very nice. Let's get the cake." He tried to reach for the mic. Grandma pulled it back. "I am not finished," she snapped. The snap was back. The lioness had woken up. "Since my health has declined, there has been much speculation about the future of this establishment. My daughter Valerie and her husband Preston have assumed that control would naturally pass to them." Valerie smiled, nodding vigorously. Preston puffed out his chest, straightening his tie. But Grandma continued, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "Leadership is not inherited. It is earned, and greed is not a qualification." She reached into the pocket of her shawl and pulled out a thick envelope. It was blue legal paper. "Effective immediately," she announced, "I have transferred 100% of my ownership shares of the Royal Savoy Hotel and all its subsidiary assets to the only person in this family who actually reads the profit and loss statements." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Happy birthday, Amara. The hotel is yours." The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. Then chaos erupted. Preston turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He knocked over his scotch glass. "What is this nonsense?" he roared. "You can't do that. You are senile. You don't know what you are signing." "I know exactly what I signed," Preston Grandma said calmly. "And I know exactly who I am cutting out." Preston lunged toward me, snatching the envelope from my hand before I could even touch it. He ripped it open, scanning the documents frantically. His eyes widened as he read the legal clauses. It was ironclad. Transfer of deed, irrevocable trust. "This is fraud," he screamed, spitting saliva. "Valerie, tell her she is crazy." My mother looked terrified. She looked from her husband to her mother, then to me. She saw the rage in Preston's eyes, and her survival instinct kicked in. She rushed over to me, grabbing my hands. Her palms were clammy. "Amara, baby, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Grandma is confused. She doesn't mean this. You can't run a $76 million business. You are too young. You are too emotional. Too emotional." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. The woman who watched me work 18-hour days to save this hotel from bankruptcy while she went on spa retreats. "I am not confused, Mom," I said, pulling my hands away. "And neither is Grandma." Valerie's face hardened. "Amara, be reasonable. Preston is a businessman. He knows how to deal with the banks. He knows how to handle the politics of this city. We need to do this as a family." "As a family," Preston sneered, stepping into my personal space. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You are going to sign those shares over to your mother and me right now. We will appoint you a nice little VP title. We will keep you on the payroll. But I am the CEO. Do you hear me? I am the man of this house. I looked at the apron on the table. Then I looked at the deed in his hand. No, I said. My voice was quiet but steady. Preston blinked. Excuse me. I said no, I repeated louder. I am the owner. And the first order of business, Preston, is that you are trespassing on my property. The room gasped. Preston's face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. He looked at my mother. Are you going to let her talk to me like that? Valerie snapped. She turned on me, her eyes full of tears and venom. How dare you? After everything we have done for you. If you don't sign that paper, Amara, you are no daughter of mine. I stared at her. Is that a threat, Mom? It is a promise, she hissed. If you think you are the boss, then you don't need our support. Pack your bags. Get out of my penthouse. Get out of my house tonight. It is snowing outside, I said quietly. I don't care, Valerie screamed. Go. And take your cheap apron with you. I looked at Grandma. She sat still, surrounded by the chaos. She didn't intervene. She just watched me, giving me a barely perceptible nod. It was a test. This was the fire she needed me to walk through. Fine, I said. I grabbed my purse. I didn't take the apron. I didn't take the coat check ticket. I walked straight to the elevator, pressing the button with a steady finger, while my mother sobbed into Preston's shoulder, and he shouted threats about lawyers and competency hearings behind my back. The elevator doors closed, shutting out the warmth and the light. 10 minutes later, I was sitting on the curb outside the hotel. The Chicago wind cut through my green dress like a knife. My phone was dead. My credit cards, which were linked to the family account, were likely already canceled. I had a $76 million hotel on paper and not a dollar to buy a cab ride. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, watching the guests leave the party. They stepped around me like I was invisible, like I was trash. Just then, a black town car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It was Mr. Henderson, Grandma's personal attorney for 40 years. He didn't smile. He just held out a manila envelope through the window. Your grandmother knew they would kick you out, he said. She told me to give you this immediately after you left the building. I took the envelope. Inside was a single key and a note written in Grandma's shaky handwriting. It read, "They think they have the power because they have the penthouse. But they forgot to check the basement. Go to the safe deposit box at First National tomorrow morning. The hotel is just the building, Amara. The real power is in the land." And I didn't give them the land. I looked up at the penthouse window where the lights were still blazing. Preston was probably pouring champagne, thinking he had won. Thinking he had scared me off. He had no idea. I wiped a snowflake from my cheek and smiled. The game hadn't just started. It was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The ink on the deed transfer was barely dry when Preston made his move. He slammed a heavy leather folder onto the glass dining table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent penthouse. The festive jazz music had stopped. The guests had been ushered out by confused security guards, leaving only the four of us. Me, my grandmother, my mother, and the man who was trying to steal my future. Sign it, Amara. Preston growled, his face flushing a deep crimson. Sign the power of attorney and transfer management control to me. It is the only way to fix the mess your grandmother just made. I looked down at the document. It was a complete surrender. If I signed it, I would technically remain the owner on paper, but Preston would have total control over the finances, the hiring, the firing, and the property assets. He could drain the accounts dry, and I would be powerless to stop him. I looked at my mother, expecting her to intervene. Mom, I said, my voice trembling slightly. You can't let him do this. Grandma gave the hotel to me. She trusts me. Valerie wouldn't look me in the eye. She was wringing her hands, picking at a loose thread on her sequined dress. Amara, baby. Please just listen to Preston. He knows what is best. He is the man of the house now. You are just a girl. You don't know how dangerous the business world is for people like us. People like us. That was her favorite phrase. It meant black women. It meant she believed we were inherently weaker, inherently less than. She had spent her whole life hiding behind men hoping their power would shield her. She didn't realize she was feeding me to a wolf just to keep herself warm. I pushed the papers back across the table. No, I said firm and loud. I am not signing anything, Preston, and I am firing you as the acting consultant, effective immediately. Pack your things and get out of my office. Preston let out a dark, humorless laugh. He walked around the table, slowly circling me like a shark. You are firing me. That is rich. He stopped right behind my mother and placed his hands on her shoulders, squeezing them possessively. Valerie, tell your daughter the reality of her living situation, he commanded. My mother looked up, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Amara, she whispered. The penthouse. The lease is in Preston's name. My stomach dropped. I knew Preston moved in when they got married, but I assumed the company still paid for the suite. Technically, Preston sneered, enjoying my shock. This apartment is my residence, and you are a guest. An unwelcome guest. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale scotch and cigars. So here is the deal, kiddo. You sign that paper, and you get to keep your nice warm bedroom and your allowance. You refuse, and you are on the street. Tonight. I looked at Grandma Estelle. She was watching me intently, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't say a word. She couldn't save me from this. She had given me the weapon, but I had to be the one to pull the trigger. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald dress. I will not sign, I said. Preston's face turned ugly. Then get out! He screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. Get the hell out of my house! Valerie stood up then. For a second I thought she was going to defend me. I thought she was going to remember the nights we spent eating ramen noodles together, before she met Preston, the times it was just us against the world. But she didn't walk toward him. She walked toward the hallway. I followed her, confused. Mom, where are you going? She didn't answer. She went into my bedroom. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open. I heard hangers clattering. Mom. Stop, what are you doing? I cried, running to the doorway. Valerie was frantically grabbing handfuls of my clothes and shoving them into my old college suitcase. She wasn't packing them. She was purging them. You have to go, Amara. She sobbed hysterically, not looking at me. You are ruining everything. Why do you have to be so stubborn? Just give him what he wants. I finally have a good life. I finally have a husband who takes care of me. Do not ruin this for me. She zipped the suitcase shut, catching the sleeve of my favorite silk blouse in the zipper, tearing it. She dragged the bag to the front door. Mom, please, I begged. It is snowing. I have nowhere to go. She opened the heavy oak door and shoved the suitcase into the hallway. It tipped over and spilled open slightly. Preston walked up behind her, putting his arm around her waist. He smirked at me. You heard your mother. Goodbye, Amara. Don't come back until you are ready to beg. The door slammed shut in my face. I stood there in the hallway staring at the wood grain. I heard the lock click, then the deadbolt, then the safety chain. My own mother. I felt a numbness spreading through my chest. It wasn't the cold yet. It was shock. I gathered my spilled clothes, shoving them back into the suitcase with shaking hands. I walked to the elevator. The ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into hell. When the doors opened, the night concierge, Mr. Thompson, looked at me with wide eyes. Miss Amara, are you okay? I couldn't speak. I just nodded and walked past him out the revolving doors and into the Chicago night. The wind hit me like a physical blow. It was 10 degrees below zero. The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets. I shivered violently in my sleeveless dress, dragging my suitcase through the slush toward the employee parking lot. I reached my car, a 10-year-old sedan that I had kept because I was sentimental. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers already turning blue. I threw my bag in the back seat and climbed in, cranking the heat. I needed a plan. I grabbed my phone and opened my banking app. I needed to book a room at the Marriott down the street. Access denied. I blinked. I tried again. Account frozen. Please contact the primary account holder. I tried my credit card. Declined. I tried my emergency fund savings account. Zero balance. Valerie. The joint accounts. Since I was a child, she had insisted we keep our finances together for tax purposes. While I was upstairs being humiliated, she had been on her phone locking me out of every single cent I had earned. I slammed the steering wheel. I screamed a raw, guttural sound that tore at my throat. I was the owner of a $76 million empire, and I couldn't even buy a cheeseburger. I sat there for a long time watching the snow pile up on the windshield. I looked up at the penthouse. The lights were blazing warm and golden against the dark sky. I could imagine them up there. Preston pouring another drink. Mom apologizing to him, trying to smooth things over, trying to be the perfect wife. They thought they had won. They thought that by stripping me of my clothes, my home, and my money, they had broken me. I wiped the tears from my face. They were cold on my skin. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope Mr. Henderson had given me. The key to the safe deposit box felt heavy in my hand. Grandma knew. She knew they would do this. She knew I needed to lose everything before I could fight for what was real. I started the engine. The old car sputtered but roared to life. I put the car in gear. I didn't look back at the penthouse. I looked forward at the snowy road. "Enjoy the champagne, Preston," I whispered to the empty car. "Drink it all. Because tomorrow, I am coming for the bottle, and the table, and the house." I drove out of the lot, leaving the Royal Savoy behind me, disappearing into the white storm, ready to become the storm myself. I woke up to the sound of sirens wailing past the thin walls of the Red Roof Inn on the outskirts of Chicago. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, a far cry from the lavender-infused air of the Royal Savoy penthouse. It had been 72 hours since my mother threw my suitcase into the snow. 72 hours since I became the owner of a $76 million empire on paper and a homeless woman in reality. I sat up on the lumpy mattress and reached for my laptop. It was my only window into the world I had lost. I logged into the hotel's internal security feed. I still had the admin passwords. Preston was arrogant, but he was technically illiterate. He had changed the locks on the doors, but he hadn't thought to change the digital keys to the servers. What I saw on the screen made my stomach turn. Preston hadn't wasted a single second. The morning after the party, he had filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship over my grandmother. He found a corrupt doctor, a man named Dr. Evans, who played golf at his country club, to sign a statement claiming Grandma Estelle was suffering from advanced dementia and that her birthday announcement was a symptom of a psychotic break. Because I had no money for a lawyer to contest it, the judge granted Preston temporary control of her assets. Temporary. That was the word he used. But the destruction I was watching on the screen was permanent. I clicked on the feed for the main lobby. My breath caught in my throat. Scaffolding was set up against the west wall. That wall was sacred. It held a mural painted in 1968 by a collective of local Black artists. It depicted the history of the neighborhood from the Jazz Age to the Civil Rights marches. It featured a portrait of Dr. King, who had actually stayed in room 412. It was vibrant, colorful, and the heart of the hotel. On the screen, two men in white overalls were rolling thick coats of paint over the mural. Not just any paint. Beige. Soulless, sterile hospital beige. I watched in horror as Dr. King's face disappeared under a layer of wet paint. I watched the jazz musicians vanish. I watched the history of my people being erased, stroke by stroke. Standing at the bottom of the ladder was Preston. He was wearing a hard hat that looked ridiculous on him, pointing and shouting instructions. Next to him was my mother, Valerie. She was holding a clipboard, nodding at everything he said. I turned up the volume on the feed. The microphone in the lobby was sensitive. It looks much cleaner now, doesn't it, Val? Preston said, his voice echoing in the empty space. That old painting was too cluttered, too political. We want our guests to feel relaxed, not guilty about history. We are going for a modern minimalist aesthetic. It is very open. Preston, my mother agreed, though her voice sounded small. Very chic. Chic. They were whitewashing 50 years of culture and calling it chic. I switched the camera view to the exterior. A crane was parked on the sidewalk. Workmen were unbolting the gold letters that spelled the Royal Savoy. The Royal Savoy wasn't just a name, it was a promise. My grandfather chose it because he wanted black travelers to feel like royalty in a country that treated them like second-class citizens. As the letter R swung down on a chain, another truck pulled up carrying the new sign. The Preston Grand. I gagged. He wasn't just stealing the hotel, he was branding it. He was pissing on the territory like a stray dog. The arrogance was breathtaking. He had owned the place for 3 days and already put his name on the door. But the worst was yet to come. I switched the feed to the kitchen. This was the engine room, the soul of the hotel. And standing in the middle of the chaos was Chef Jefferson. Chef Jefferson had been with us for 30 years. He was 60 years old with hands scarred from hot ovens and a laugh that could fill a stadium. His shrimp and grits were legendary. His collard greens had won awards. He was the reason people lined up around the block for Sunday brunch. On the screen, Chef Jefferson was untying his apron. He wasn't smiling. Preston walked into the kitchen, followed by a tall, thin man in a pristine white chef's coat who looked down his nose at everything. "Listen up, everyone," Preston shouted, clapping his hands. "I want to introduce you to Executive Chef Jean-Pierre. He comes to us from a Michelin star restaurant in Paris." The kitchen staff went silent. "We are making some changes," Preston continued. "We are elevating the brand, no more heavy, greasy soul food. We are pivoting to a French fusion menu. Small plates, high-end, sophisticated." Chef Jefferson stepped forward. "Mr. Preston," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Our guests come here for the comfort food. It is what we are famous for. You take away the mac and cheese, you take away the customers." Preston laughed. A cruel, dismissing sound. "That is exactly the point, old man. We want a different kind of customer. The kind who pays $50 for a salad and doesn't ask for hot sauce. We are cleaning up the clientele. Cleaning up." The racial coding was so loud it was deafening. Preston turned to Chef Jefferson. "We won't be needing your services anymore. Your style is a little too rustic for the new direction. Pack your knives." I watched Chef Jefferson's shoulders slump. This man had fed me when I was a child doing homework at the prep table. He had cooked for my graduation. He was family. Chef Jean-Pierre stepped in, picking up a pot of Chef Jefferson's famous gumbo that was simmering on the stove. He sniffed it and wrinkled his nose. "Disgusting," he muttered with a heavy accent. "It smells like swamp." He dumped the entire pot into the trash. I screamed at my laptop screen. "No." My mother stood in the corner of the kitchen watching. She knew Chef Jefferson. He had baked her wedding cake. She looked down at her shoes, refusing to meet his eyes as he walked past her carrying his knife roll, escorted out by security like a criminal. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to watch anymore. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and angry. This wasn't just business. This was a cultural eviction. Preston was systematically removing everything that made the hotel black, everything that made it ours. He wanted the real estate, but he hated the people who built it. I paced around the tiny motel room. I felt powerless. I had no money. I had no lawyer. I had no voice. Or did I? I opened the laptop again. I didn't log into the security feed this time. I logged into Instagram. The Royal Savoy's official account had 200,000 followers. Preston hadn't changed that password yet. I saw a notification. Preston had started a live stream from the main account. He was standing in front of the ruined mural, beaming at the camera. "Welcome to the new era," he was saying to the phone. The Preston Grand is bringing European luxury to Chicago. Say goodbye to the past and hello to the future. I looked at the comments section. It was already moving fast. Where is the mural one? User asked. Why is the sign gone? Asked another. Is it true you fired Chef Jefferson? I took a deep breath. I logged in as the admin. I couldn't stop him from painting the walls, but I could make sure the world knew exactly what shade of beige he was using. I started typing. I didn't post as the hotel. I pinned a comment to the top of his live stream. This is Amara, the grandson of the founder. What you are watching is not a renovation. It is an erasure. He has fired the staff. He has destroyed the art. He has banned the food. He is not bringing luxury. He is bleaching our history. I hit enter. Then I took a screenshot of Chef Jean-Pierre dumping the gumbo in the trash, which I had saved from the security feed buffer. I posted it to the main feed with the caption, "The new owner thinks our heritage belongs in the garbage." I watched the numbers climb. The likes, the shares, the anger. Preston thought he could lock me out of the building. He thought he could paint over the truth. But he forgot that the Royal Savoy wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a community, and he had just declared war on the entire south side of Chicago. I lay back on the cheap pillow. My heart was still racing, but the tears had stopped. Let him paint, I whispered. Let him spend every dime he has trying to turn my grandmother's legacy into a generic box. Because when I took it back, and I would take it back, I wasn't just going to scrape off the paint. I was going to make him pay for every single brushstroke. I looked at the key Mr. Henderson had given me, the safe deposit box. Tomorrow. Tomorrow I would find out what Grandma Estelle had hidden in the basement. Tomorrow the resistance would begin. Back at the hotel office, Preston was discovering that stealing a title was easy, but stealing the actual operation was a nightmare. He sat in my grandmother's vintage leather chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. Across the desk sat the contractor he had hired to paint over the mural. The man was holding an invoice for $12,000, and he looked impatient. "Just transfer the funds," Preston said, waving his hand dismissively. "The account number is on file." The contractor shook his head. "The payment bounced, Mr. Preston. It says authorization required." Preston frowned. He leaned forward and typed his password into the banking terminal. "Access denied." He typed it again, harder this time. "Access denied." He tried to access the payroll system. Locked. He tried to open the vendor database. Encrypted. I had built these systems myself. I had set up two-factor authentication that pinged only to my phone, which was currently sitting on a nightstand in a cheap motel 10 miles away. Preston realized with a sinking feeling that he was the captain of a ship, but he didn't have the keys to the engine room. He couldn't pay the staff. He couldn't pay the contractors. He couldn't even order fresh linens. He picked up his phone to call me. His thumb hovered over my name, but then he stopped. If he called me, he would have to admit he needed me. He would have to admit that the girl he called a kitchen helper was actually the brains of the entire operation. His ego wouldn't allow it. He looked at the contractor. "Give me a moment," he said. He turned his chair to look out the window at the snowy city. A dark idea began to form in his mind. If he couldn't get the passwords from me voluntarily, he would force the legal system to get them for him. And he would make sure I was too busy fighting for my freedom to fight for the hotel. He picked up the landline. He dialed 911. He cleared his throat, pitching his voice to sound shaky and devastated. "Yes, police, please. I need to report a grand larceny. My name is Preston Miller. I am the owner of the Royal Savoy. My stepdaughter." God, this is hard to say. My stepdaughter Amara just cleared out our business accounts. She took everything. $200,000. He paused, listening to the dispatcher. "Yes, she is dangerous. She made threats before she left. She said she would burn the place down. Please, you have to hurry." He hung up the phone and smiled. It was a lie so big, so audacious that he knew it would work. He was a wealthy white business owner. I was a disgruntled black employee. In America, that was often all the evidence the police needed. At the Red Roof Inn, the red neon sign buzzed outside my window. It was 2 in the morning. I was asleep, curled up under a thin, scratchy blanket, dreaming of the hotel kitchen. In my dream, I was cooking gumbo with Chef Jefferson, but the pot kept turning into paint. I didn't hear the sirens. I didn't hear the boots on the stairs. The first sound I heard was the wood of my door splintering. Crash! I shot up in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. The door flew open, kicking off its hinges. Blinding white light from tactical flashlights flooded the tiny room. Police hands. "Show me your hands," I screamed, shielding my eyes. "I am in bed. I am unarmed." A figure in heavy tactical gear rushed at me. Before I could process what was happening, a gloved hand grabbed my wrist and yanked me off the mattress. I hit the floor hard, my shoulder slamming against the cheap carpet. "Stay down. Stop resisting." I wasn't resisting, I was terrified. A heavy boot pressed into the middle of my back, pinning me to the floor. The air left my lungs in a painful whoosh. "Please," I wheezed. "I didn't do anything. My name is Amara." "Shut up," the officer barked. He was a large white man with a buzz cut. He wrenched my arms behind my back and snapped the handcuffs on. They were tight, cutting into my skin. He hauled me to my feet. I was wearing only my silk pajamas. The room was freezing now that the door was broken. "Where is the money?" the officer demanded, shining the light in my face. "What money?" I cried, blinking through tears. "I don't have any money. Check my pockets. Check the room. I have nothing." "Don't play dumb. We know you took the 200 grand. 200,000. My knees almost buckled. "Preston." It had to be Preston. They didn't let me put on a coat. They didn't let me put on shoes. They dragged me out of the room barefoot. The motel walkway was lined with people. Other guests had come out to watch the show. They held up their phones filming me. I saw myself through their eyes. A black woman in disheveled pajamas being dragged away by 4 police officers. I wasn't a CEO to them. I wasn't a victim. I was just another criminal on the evening news. I lowered my head, trying to hide my face, but the shame burned hotter than the cold wind. They threw me into the back of the squad car. The plastic seat was hard and cold. As we sped away toward the precinct, I saw a news van pulling into the motel parking lot. Preston had tipped them off. He wanted a spectacle. At the station, they processed me like livestock. Fingerprints, mugshot. They took my phone and my laptop, the only tools I had to prove my innocence. I was thrown into a holding cell with 3 other women. It smelled of urine and despair. There was a small TV mounted in the corner, protected by a wire cage. An hour later, the morning news came on. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Scandal at the historic Royal Savoy." My mugshot flashed on the screen. It was the one they had just taken. My hair was messy, my eyes were red and swollen. I looked guilty. Amara Brooks, the stepdaughter of local developer Preston Miller, has been arrested for embezzling $200,000 from her family's business. The screen cut to a clip of Preston standing in front of the hotel. He was wearing a suit, looking somber and heartbroken. My mother stood next to him, wiping a tear from her eye. "We tried to help her," Preston told the reporters, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We gave her a job. We gave her a home. But she has a problem. We just want the money back so we can pay our staff. We are praying for her." My mother nodded into the microphone. "Please, Amara," she sobbed. "Just tell us where the money is. We forgive you." I stared at the screen, numb with shock. They had flipped the narrative completely. I was the thief. They were the benevolent victims. The women in the cell looked at me. One of them, a tough-looking woman with a scar on her cheek, shook her head. "Stealing from your own mama," the woman said, spitting on the floor. "That is cold, girl. That is real cold." I retreated to the corner of the cell, pulling my knees to my chest. I had no lawyer, no money, and now no reputation. Preston had anticipated my move. He knew I would try to use the legal system or the media, so he turned both of them against me first. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to call him from this cell and beg him to drop the charges in exchange for the passwords. He wanted me to trade my inheritance for my freedom. I shivered on the metal bench. The image of my mother crying on TV burned in my mind. She knew. She knew I didn't take that money. She knew Preston was lying. And yet she stood there and played her part. That was the moment the last tiny piece of hope I held for my mother died. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I was done crying. You want a villain, Preston? I thought, my jaw clenching. You want a criminal? Fine. I remembered the key Mr. Henderson gave me. It was confiscated in my property bag at the front desk. But they couldn't confiscate what was in my head. I knew the box number. Box 404. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to wait. Because Preston had made one fatal mistake. By arresting me, he had put me on public record. And when I proved that the money never left the account because I was the only one who could access it, his lie would become his prison sentence. I leaned my head against the cold cinder block wall and waited for the dawn. The real fight had just begun. The concrete bench in the holding cell sucked the heat right out of my bones. I had been sitting in the same position for 12 hours, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. The air smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. Every time the heavy metal door clanged open, my heart jumped. I lifted my head, hoping to see a familiar face, hoping to see my mother. I told myself she was coming. I told myself that the traffic was bad, or that she was arguing with the police sergeant at the front desk, demanding to see her daughter. I told myself that no mother, not even Valerie, would leave her child in a place like this, accused of a crime she didn't commit. But hour after hour passed and nobody came. The other women in the cell had stopped staring at me. They were asleep or staring at the ceiling, lost in their own nightmares. I was alone in a crowded room. Around noon, a guard banged on the bars with his baton. "Brooks," he shouted. "Lawyer is here." I stood up, my legs stiff and aching. Lawyer. I didn't have a lawyer. Preston had fired the company legal team, and I certainly didn't have the money to hire one. It must be a public defender. A court-appointed attorney who would tell me to plead guilty to a lesser charge just to make the paperwork go away. I followed the guard down the long fluorescent-lit hallway. My bare feet were cold on the linoleum. I was still wearing my silk pajamas, now stained and wrinkled. I felt stripped of my dignity, stripped of my identity. The guard opened the door to the visitation room. I walked in expecting to see an overworked city attorney in a cheap suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a luxury sedan. It was Mr. Henderson. He was sitting at the metal table wearing a three-piece charcoal suit that cost more than my car. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he smelled of peppermint and expensive tobacco. He looked completely out of place in this grim, gray room, like a diamond in a gutter. "Mr. Henderson," I whispered. He stood up and gave me a small, respectful bow. "Miss Amara, I apologize for the delay. The bail hearing took longer than anticipated. The judge was difficult, but it is handled." "You paid my bail?" I asked, sinking into the chair opposite him. He nodded. $250,000. Posted in cash 20 minutes ago. You are free to go as soon as we sign these papers. I stared at him. "I don't have that kind of money to pay you back. My accounts are frozen. Preston took everything." Mr. Henderson smiled, a rare expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I do not work for Preston Miller. I have never worked for Preston Miller. I represent the estate of Estelle Robinson. Your grandmother gave me strict instructions. She said that if you ended up in here, I was to get you out immediately." Grandma. Even from her wheelchair, even trapped in that penthouse with those vultures, she was watching over me. Tears pricked my eyes hot and fast. "How is she?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Is she okay?" "She is playing the part," Mr. Henderson said, lowering his voice. She is letting Preston believe she is confused. She is letting him believe he has won. It is a dangerous game, Amara, but she believes you are the only one who can finish it. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Your personal effects have been returned, he said, but there is one more thing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He tipped it over, and a heavy brass key fell onto the table with a dull thud. It looked old, much older than the modern keycards we used at the hotel. I picked it up. The metal was cold and smooth. This is the key to safe deposit box 404 at First National, Mr. Henderson said. Your grandmother wanted you to have it. She also wanted me to give you a message. I leaned in. What is the message? Mr. Henderson looked me dead in the eye. He said Grandma says Preston is a fool who only looks at the paint on the walls. He stole the shell, but he forgot about the pearl. She said to tell you to look for the Land Trust of 1985. The Land Trust. I frowned, turning the words over in my mind. Land Trust. 1985. Suddenly the air in the room seemed to shift. My brain, which had been foggy with fear and exhaustion, snapped into high gear. The memories of my grandfather teaching me about real estate law came flooding back. I remembered sitting on his knee looking at blueprints. I remembered him telling me that in Chicago you never truly own anything unless you own the dirt underneath it. My eyes widened. Oh my God, I whispered. Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow. You understand? I understand. I said, my heart beginning to race. The Royal Savoy, the building, the brand, the operations. That is the shell. That is what Preston stole. That is what he has guardianship over. And the pearl, Mr. Henderson prompted. The land, I said, breathless. The actual ground the hotel sits on. Grandfather never put the land in the company name. He put it in a separate trust to protect it from bankruptcy or from theft. I looked at Mr. Henderson. A land trust separates the ownership of the property from the ownership of the building. If Preston took over the operating company, he thinks he owns the whole package. He thinks the land comes with the building. But if the land is in a trust, I continued, my voice getting stronger, and the lease on that land expires, then the owner of the land has the right to evict the owner of the building. Mr. Henderson finished, a small satisfied smile playing on his lips. Or charge them rent. Or shut them down completely. I squeezed the brass key in my hand so hard it hurt. It was the best pain I had ever felt. Preston didn't check the title search, I said, a laugh bubbling up in my throat. He was so arrogant, so desperate to paint over the murals and fire the staff, that he didn't do his due diligence. He is squatting on my land. Technically, Mr. Henderson corrected, checking his watch. The 99-year ground lease expires in 48 hours. If it is not renewed by the beneficiary of the trust, the landlord can take possession of all improvements on the land. That includes the building. That includes the furniture. That includes the new sign he just put up. And who is the beneficiary? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mr. Henderson stood up and buttoned his jacket. That is what is inside box 404, Miss Amara. I stood up with him. I wasn't the scared girl in pajamas anymore. I felt tall. I felt dangerous. Let's go, I said. We walked out of the police station into the blinding afternoon sun. The Chicago wind was still brutal, but I didn't feel the cold. I saw a news van parked across the street, probably waiting to catch a glimpse of the fallen heiress. I walked straight past them, my head held high. Let them film me. Let them think I was defeated. Let Preston think he had crushed me. I climbed into the back of Mr. Henderson's town car. The leather seats were warm. Where to, Miss Amara? The driver asked. First National Bank, I said, staring out the window at the skyline. And then the mall. I need a red dress. A red dress? Mr. Henderson asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I said, a red dress. Because when I walk into Preston's gala tomorrow night to take back my empire, I want to make sure everyone sees the blood on the floor. The car pulled away into traffic. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who held the detonator to a bomb that her enemy didn't even know he was standing on. Preston wanted a war. He wanted to play dirty. Well, he was about to learn that you can't build a castle if you don't own the sand. The air outside the precinct tasted like diesel fumes and cold city grit, but to me it was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. Mr. Henderson stood by the open door of his town car, his face grim. He had pulled every string he had to get the charges dropped provisionally, but the investigation was still open. I was technically free, but legally I was walking on a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Mr. Henderson handed me a bottle of water. "Are you sure about this, Amara?" he asked, his voice low. "Once you walk back into that penthouse, you are on your own. If he realizes what you are doing before he signs the document, he could have you arrested again within the hour." I took a long sip of water, washing away the taste of the holding cell. "He won't realize," I said. My voice was raspy but steady. "Preston is a narcissist. He doesn't see people, Mr. Henderson. He sees mirrors. As long as I show him the reflection he wants to see, he will be blind to the knife in my hand." I smoothed down my wrinkled silk pajamas, which I was still wearing. It was part of the costume. I needed to look broken. I needed to look like a girl who had spent the night sleeping on concrete and crying for her mother. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and puffy. I slumped my shoulders. "Let's go," I said. "Take me to the lion's den." The drive to the Royal Savoy was a blur of gray slush and traffic. When we pulled up to the curb, I saw the new sign being hoisted into place, the Preston Grand. The font was tacky gold script that looked like it belonged on a cheap casino, not a historic landmark. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I walked through the lobby. The staff who remained looked at me with pity. I kept my head down, clutching my arms around my chest, playing the part of the defeated stepdaughter. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. I just walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors opened and the smell of expensive scotch hit me instantly. Preston was sitting on the velvet sofa, his feet propped up on my grandmother's antique coffee table. He was watching the news, a replay of my arrest. He looked delighted. My mother was sitting across from him, looking pale and nervous. When she saw me, she jumped up. "Amara," she breathed. "Oh, thank God. Are you okay?" She took a step toward me, but Preston held up a hand. "Stay there, Val." He didn't stand up. He just swirled the amber liquid in his glass and looked me up and down with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Look who it is. The prodigal daughter returns. Did you enjoy your stay at the county hotel? I hear the accommodations are a bit rustic." I stood in the entryway, shivering slightly. I let my lip tremble. I didn't say anything. "Well," Preston barked, "do you have something to say, or did you just come here to steal more silverware?" I took a deep breath. I walked slowly into the room. I stopped right in front of the coffee table. And then I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I dropped to my knees. My mother gasped. "Amara, get up," she whispered. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "I belong down here." Preston was right. Preston's eyebrows shot up. He sat forward, putting his drink down. He looked like a predator who had just sensed blood. "What did you say?" "I said you were right, Preston," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the floor. I looked at my hands. I was jealous. I was angry that Grandma gave the hotel to me, but I didn't know how to run it. I was scared, so I lashed out. "I tried to sabotage you because I knew I wasn't good enough." Silence filled the room. It was thick and heavy. I could feel Preston's ego inflating, filling the space like a toxic gas. He laughed, a low, satisfied chuckle. "I told you, Val," he said, glancing at my mother. "I told you she would break. These modern girls think they are so tough, but give them one night in the real world and they come crawling back to Daddy." He stood up and walked over to me. He stood right in front of me, so I was staring at his polished Italian loafers. He reached down and tilted my chin up with his finger. "Say it again," he commanded. Say I am the better businessman. You are the better businessman, Preston. I said, a single tear leaking out of my eye. You know how to handle the world. I am just administrative fluff. He grinned, showing all his teeth. That is right, you are. He walked over to his desk and picked up a thick stack of stapled papers. He tossed them onto the coffee table in front of me. The loud slap of the paper made me flinch. Mr. Henderson called my lawyers, Preston said. He says you are willing to make a deal. You drop your claim to the hotel you sign over full operational control to me permanently, and in exchange I drop the embezzlement charges. I will even give you a small allowance, $500 a week, enough to rent a studio apartment somewhere, far away. I looked at the document. It was titled, Irrevocable Transfer of Operational Management and Assets. It was a death warrant for my legacy. If I signed this, Preston would have total unchecked power over the company. He could sell the furniture, he could fire the staff, he could burn the building down, and I couldn't stop him. But I also knew what Mr. Henderson had told me. This contract was for the operating company. It had nothing to do with the land trust. I reached for the pen. My hand shook. I wasn't faking the shaking. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was enough to power a city block. I will sign, I whispered. Wait, Preston said. My heart stopped. Did he know? Did he suspect? He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself another drink. He wanted to savor this. He wanted to watch me bleed. Make sure you initial every page. He called out, his back turned to me. I want there to be no confusion when I kick you out. This was my chance. I reached into the waistband of my pajama pants where I had hidden the folded page Mr. Henderson had given me. It was identical to the last page of Preston's contract. Same font, same margins, same paper weight. But there was one difference. Preston's contract had a standard liability clause. Mr. Henderson's version had a universal assumption of debt clause. It stated that by accepting management control, the assignee Preston personally assumed full legal responsibility for all existing debts of the entity, including any outstanding tax liens. And I knew for a fact that the Royal Savoy had a $15 million tax lien from 1990 that my grandmother had intentionally kept on the books as a poison pill for exactly this kind of situation. Preston was humming to himself, clinking ice cubes into his glass. My mother was staring out the window, unable to watch. With a move I had practiced 100 times in my head, I slid the real signature page under the sofa cushion and replaced it with Mr. Henderson's page. It took less than a second. I initialed the first 10 pages rapidly. Flip, scribble, flip, scribble. Done, I said. Preston walked back over. He looked at the stack of papers. He didn't check the page numbers. He didn't read the fine print. He just saw his victory. He picked up the pen. He signed his name with a flourish. Preston Miller, CEO. He smiled at me, a smile of pure malice. Pleasure doing business with you, Amara, he said. Now get out of my hotel, and don't come back for the allowance until Monday. I don't want to see your face this weekend. I stood up. My knees were sore, but my spirit was soaring. I looked at my mother. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were sad but resigned. She had chosen her side. Goodbye, Mom, I said quietly. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again. She looked down at her diamond ring, the ring Preston had bought her with money he borrowed against the hotel. I walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly with a click that sounded like a lock snapping shut on a prison cell. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. As soon as the doors closed and I was alone, I slumped against the wall and let out a long, shaky breath. Then I started to laugh. It started as a giggle and grew into a full-throated laugh that shook my whole body. He signed it. He actually signed it. Preston Miller thought he had just won an empire. He didn't know he had just signed a confession to tax fraud and accepted $15 million of debt that would bankrupt him before the weekend was over. I pulled out my phone. I dialed Mr. Henderson. It is done, I said. He signed. Excellent, Mr. Henderson said. I will file the document with the court immediately. The trap is set. Now, Amara, go get your dress. I watched the numbers on the elevator count down. 50, 40, 30. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the executioner. And tomorrow night at the gala, I was going to drop the blade. Monday morning arrived with a cold gray light filtering through the blinds of the studio apartment I had rented with the last of my cash. It was a far cry from the penthouse. The faucet dripped, the radiator hissed like an angry snake, and the view was a brick wall. But I didn't mind. My eyes were glued to the screen of my laptop where the real drama was unfolding. I had accessed the camera in the executive office. It was the one room Preston hadn't thought to sweep for bugs because he was too busy measuring the windows for new drapes. On the screen, Preston was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. He was wearing a new suit, Italian silk, likely charged to the company card he had just reactivated. Sitting across from him was a man I recognized immediately. Mr. Sterling, a senior loan officer from Chase Bank. I turned up the volume on my speakers. Mr. Sterling looked skeptical. He was flipping through the glossy brochure Preston had printed over the weekend. The cover read, "The Preston Grand, a new standard of luxury." "So let me get this straight," Mr. Preston, the banker said, adjusting his glasses. "You want to secure a line of credit for $50 million. You plan to gut the kitchen, remodel the lobby, and rebrand a hotel that has been profitable for 40 years. Preston stopped pacing. He leaned over the desk, his eyes manic. Profitable is a strong word, Sterling. It was surviving. It was catering to a niche market. I'm going to open it up to the world. I'm going to put a Michelin star restaurant on the roof. I am going to put a spa in the basement. But to do that, I need capital. Mr. Sterling sighed. He closed the brochure. "Mr. Preston, I have looked at the transfer documents you filed this morning. You are now the sole operator of the management company. Congratulations. However, the bank is concerned about the transition. The previous management under Miss Amara was very conservative. You are proposing a radical shift." Preston slammed his hand on the desk. "That is because the previous management was thinking small. I am thinking big. Are you going to give me the money, or do I need to walk across the street to Wells Fargo?" I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. Preston was playing the tough guy. He thought he could bully a bank the way he bullied my mother. Mr. Sterling didn't flinch. "We are willing to extend the credit," he said slowly. "But given the risk profile of this renovation and the speed of the ownership transfer, the bank requires additional security. We cannot lend against the business assets alone." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Take a lien on the furniture. Take a lien on the art. I don't care." "That is not enough," Sterling said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "We require a personal guarantee from the primary operator." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The trap I hadn't even set, but one I knew Preston would walk right into. A personal guarantee meant that if the business couldn't pay back the loan, the bank could come after the signer's personal assets. His house, his car, his savings, his retirement fund. It pierced the corporate veil completely. Preston hesitated. He looked at the paper. "You want me to sign personally?" he asked. "If you are confident in your vision, Mr. Preston, it shouldn't be a problem," Sterling said smoothly. "Unless, of course, you don't believe you can pay us back." I held my breath. I knew Preston's trigger. It was his ego. If you challenged his competence, he would burn the world down to prove you wrong. My mother Valerie was sitting on the sofa in the corner of the office. She looked up from her magazine. "Honey, maybe we should read that first," she said tentatively. "A personal guarantee sounds risky." Preston spun around and glared at her. "Be quiet, Val. This is how men do business. You have to spend money to make money." He turned back to Sterling. He snatched the pen from the banker's hand. "I have zero doubt in my vision," Preston declared. "I will sign it. I will sign it twice if you want." "No," I whispered to the screen. "Don't just sign it. Own it." Preston scribbled his signature on the line. He pressed down so hard the pen almost tore through the paper. There he said, sliding the document back. 50 million. I want the funds available by noon. I have contractors waiting. Mr. Sterling checked the signature and nodded. A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Preston. The funds will be wired shortly. As the banker left the room, Preston let out a whoop of victory. He grabbed my mother and spun her around. We did it, Val, $50 million. We are going to be kings of this city. I sat back in my chair and closed the laptop. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. Preston thought he had just signed a loan document. He didn't know he had just signed a confession. What Preston didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to check in the due diligence files I kept locked in the server, was the history of the operating company he had just fought so hard to control. My grandfather, the original founder, was a brilliant man, but he was also paranoid about the government. Back in 1990, the IRS had audited the hotel. They claimed the business owed $15 million in back taxes due to a dispute over depreciation assets. Grandfather had fought it for years. Eventually, they reached a stalemate. The debt was placed in a special status called currently not collectible. Because the operating company at the time technically had no assets, everything was leased from the land trust. It was a zombie debt. As long as the company remained under family management and didn't take on excessive external risk, the IRS left it alone. It sat there, dormant, waiting. But there was a clause in that tax agreement. Clause 4, Section B. I could recite it from memory. If the operating entity undergoes a change in control to a non-bloodline descendant, and that new operator executes a personal guarantee for external financing exceeding $1 million, the dormant tax lien is immediately reactivated and attaches to the personal guarantor. Grandpa had written that clause to prevent exactly what was happening right now. He wanted to ensure that no outsider could ever leverage the hotel for a massive loan without being crushed by the weight of the past. By signing that personal guarantee with Chase Bank, Preston had just personally volunteered to pay my grandfather's $15 million tax bill plus 30 years of interest. The moment that wire transfer hit the account, the IRS computers would be flagged. They would see the influx of cash. They would see the new guarantor. Preston hadn't just bet his house on the new loan. He had bet his life on an old debt. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the IRS whistleblower office. I didn't feel guilty. Preston had called the police on me for a crime I didn't commit. I was simply returning the favor by reporting a crime he was about to commit, spending loan money that technically belonged to the government. "Hello," I said when the agent answered. "I would like to report a significant recovery opportunity regarding the Royal Savoy tax lien case, number 90-445. Yes, the new owner has just assumed full personal liability, and he has $50 million of fresh liquidity sitting in his account as of—" I glanced at the clock. "About 5 minutes from now." I hung up the phone. I walked over to the small closet in my studio apartment. Hanging there wrapped in plastic was the dress I had bought yesterday. It was red, deep blood red, the kind of red that demanded attention, the kind of red you wear when you are coming to bury a king. Tonight was the gala. Preston would be celebrating his new loan. He would be celebrating his victory. I ran my hand over the silk fabric. "Enjoy the champagne, Preston," I whispered, "because tomorrow the tax man cometh. And he is coming for everything." The collapse of the Preston Grand did not start with an explosion. It started with a phone call, or rather 20 phone calls that I made from my cramped studio apartment while eating instant noodles. Preston thought he had bought a hotel. He thought he had bought a building with rooms and beds and elevators, but he forgot that a business is not made of bricks. It is made of relationships. And those relationships belong to me. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Abernathy. He was the owner of Southside Linens. He had been washing the Royal Savoy's sheets for 40 years. He was also the deacon at my grandmother's church. "Hello, Mr. Abernathy," I said. "It is Amara." "Amara, child," he answered, his voice warm. "We heard what happened. The choir is praying for you. How can I help? I don't need prayers right now. Mr. Abernathy, I said. I need a favor. You know that invoice Preston hasn't paid yet. The one for last month. I surely do, he said. He told my driver the check is in the mail. It isn't, I said. And it never will be. Preston just took out a massive loan, but he isn't planning to pay the local vendors. He is planning to bring in a corporate service from out of state. He calls your company, let me quote him, unreliable urban labor. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Abernathy spoke, and his voice was hard as granite. Unreliable. Is that so? I think he needs a demonstration of what reliability looks like, I suggested. Consider it done, Amara. 2 hours later, the chaos began. I watched it unfold on the security monitors like a slow-motion car crash. It started in housekeeping. The head housekeeper, Maria, stormed into the lobby. She was waving her arms. Mr. Preston, she screamed. We have no towels. We have no sheets. The delivery truck did not come. Preston looked up from his iPad, where he was busy picking out Italian marble for the new lobby. What do you mean it didn't come? Call them. We called, Maria said. They said they are closed for inventory, indefinitely. Preston turned purple. He grabbed the phone and dialed Southside Linens. I could imagine the voicemail he was hearing. He slammed the phone down. Fine, he shouted. Use the spares. We have no spares, Maria yelled back. You told us to throw away the old linens because they were not thread count enough for your new brand. We have guests checking in at 3 o'clock. What do we put on the beds? Paper towels. Preston ignored her. He was already dialing another number. But I had already called the produce supplier, and the florist, and the butcher. By dinner time, the kitchen was a war zone. Chef Jean-Pierre, the fancy French chef Preston had hired to replace Chef Jefferson, was having a meltdown. He stormed into the dining room wearing his tall white hat. I cannot cook, he announced to the room full of confused diners. There is no fresh fish, the vegetables are wilted, and the meat delivery was cancelled. Preston stood up, trying to maintain his composure. He smiled a tight, fake smile at the guests. Just a minor supply chain issue, folks. Global logistics, you know how it is. He turned to the chef and hissed, Make something else. Use the freezer. The chef looked at him with disdain. You want me to serve frozen food at a 5-star hotel? I am an artist, not a microwave technician. While they argued, I executed phase 2 of the plan. The infrastructure. The Royal Savoy was an old building. It had quirks. The boiler system was from 1955. It required a very specific, delicate touch. If you didn't manually depressurize the valve on the 3rd floor every Tuesday, the hot water would stop reaching the penthouse suites. I used to do it myself every week. Preston, of course, didn't even know where the valve was. I logged into the building management system. I saw the pressure warning light blinking red. Normally, I would send a maintenance ticket. Today, I just clicked dismiss and closed the window. The scream came from the penthouse suite A. It wasn't just any guest. It was Mrs. Vanderhoven. She was the wife of a senator and the most influential socialite in Chicago. Preston had practically begged her to stay there for free, just to post about the rebrand on her social media. I switched the camera view to the lobby. The elevator doors opened and Mrs. Vanderhoven marched out wrapped in a bathrobe, her hair dripping wet and covered in shampoo. She looked like a drowned rat and she was furious. Mr. Preston, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. There is ice water coming out of my shower. Ice water! I am freezing! Preston rushed over, his hands fluttering uselessly. Mrs. Vanderhoven. I am so sorry. We will fix it immediately. It must be a glitch. A glitch, she spat. First the sheet scratched my skin, then the dinner was inedible. And now I have hypothermia. This is a slum, Preston. You turned a historic landmark into a slum. That word snapped something inside Preston. The stress of the vendors, the money, and the embarrassment boiled over. Watch your mouth, he snapped at her. The lobby went silent. Mrs. Vanderhoven's eyes widened. Excuse me. I said, watch your mouth, Preston yelled, losing all control. Do you know how much money I spent on this place? I am trying to elevate this neighborhood. I am trying to bring civilization to the South Side, and all you people do is complain. You people? Mrs. Vanderhoven said quietly. She wasn't black, but she knew exactly what that tone meant. Preston spun around, addressing the entire lobby. He pointed at Maria, the housekeeper. He pointed at the black bellhop. It is not my fault the water is cold. It is the incompetence of this staff. I hired them out of charity. I try to give opportunities to these people, but they are lazy. They don't understand luxury. They are sabotaging me. People pulled out their phones. I saw the red recording lights blinking. Preston didn't stop. He was on a roll, fueled by his own inadequacy. I should have fired all of them. I should have brought in a clean crew from the suburbs. You can't run a 5-star business with 3-star people. Mrs. Vanderhoven looked at him with pure disgust. She tightened her bathrobe. I am checking out, she said coldly, and I am telling everyone I know to never set foot in this racist establishment again. She turned on her heel and walked out. The other guests followed. A mass exodus. Preston stood in the middle of the lobby, panting heavily. He looked around and saw the phones pointing at him. He realized too late what he had done. He had just committed brand suicide on livestream. In the back office, my mother Valerie was witnessing a different kind of horror. She wasn't watching the lobby, she was watching the bank account. I had hacked into the internal camera in the office too. I saw her staring at the screen, her hand covering her mouth. The refunds were hitting the account like machine gun fire. Ding, 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 -$5,000, -$12,000, -$20,000. The $50 million loan that had just hit the account that morning was already bleeding out. Every guest who checked out demanded a full refund plus damages. Vendors were demanding rush fees for emergency deliveries. The canceled contracts had penalties. Valerie picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped it twice. She dialed Preston's cell phone, even though he was just outside in the lobby. Preston, come in here, she whispered when he answered. Not now. Val Preston barked, coming into the office, slamming the door. I have a situation. We have a bigger situation, Valerie said, turning the monitor toward him. Look at the cash flow. We have lost $200,000 in refunds in the last hour. At this rate, we won't have enough liquidity to make the first loan interest payment on Friday. Preston stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face. It is a glitch, he muttered. It has to be a glitch. Amara. It is Amara. She is doing this. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He looked right at the camera lens, right at me, though he couldn't see me. I know you are watching, he screamed at the empty room. You think you are smart. You think you can break me. I have $50 million. I can buy new sheets. I can buy new pipes. I can buy a new reputation. I took a bite of my noodles and smiled at the screen. No, Preston, I said to the empty air. You can't buy a reputation. You can only rent it. And your lease just expired. I watched as he slumped into my grandmother's chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. But he still had the money. He still thought the money would save him. He didn't know that the IRS was already printing the seizure notice. He didn't know that the video of his rant was already trending on Twitter with the hashtag #BoycottPrestonGrand. I closed the laptop. The infrastructure was crumbled. The reputation was destroyed. The staff was alienated. The table was set. The trap was primed. Tomorrow night was the gala, the grand opening. He was going to stand on that stage and brag about his success, and I was going to be there in my red dress to hand him the bill. Wednesday morning, the office looked like a crime scene. Empty takeout boxes were piled on the mahogany desk. Stacks of unpaid invoices covered the floor like snow. And in the middle of it all sat Preston. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. His expensive Italian suit was wrinkled and stained with coffee. The manic energy from Monday was gone, replaced by a feral desperation. I was watching him from the comfort of my studio apartment, eating a bagel and drinking fresh orange juice. The IRS freeze on the hotel accounts hadn't hit the news yet, but the banks knew. Bankers talk. The $50 million line of credit was effectively dead locked down by the government lien I had triggered. Preston was on the phone holding the receiver with a white-knuckled grip. "What do you mean declined?" he shouted into the phone. "I am Preston Miller. I own the Royal Savoy. I need that liquidity for an event tonight. The gala is tonight." I could hear the muffled voice of the bank manager on the other end. "I am sorry, Mr. Preston. Your risk profile has changed. We cannot advance any further funds until the tax situation is clarified." Preston slammed the phone down so hard I thought it would crack. He swept a pile of papers off the desk in a blind rage. He was cornered. The gala was his last stand. He had invited the mayor. He had invited the press. He had promised a night of unimaginable luxury to prove that the boycott was wrong. If he canceled it, he was finished. But he had no money to pay the caterers, no money to pay the band, and no money to bribe the inspectors to overlook the boiler issues. He needed cash. Fast. And when a man like Preston needs cash and the banks say no, he turns to the shadows. I watched as he pulled a burner phone from his drawer. I didn't have a tap on that phone, but I didn't need one. I saw him dial a number from a business card that was black with gold lettering. I zoomed in on the card with the camera. Apex Capital Solutions. It was a fancy name for a loan shark operation run by a man named Silas Vance. They didn't break kneecaps. They were worse. They broke lives with interest rates that hovered just below the legal definition of criminal. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the service entrance. Two men in dark suits walked into the office. One of them was Vance. He was short, bald, and smiled like a crocodile. Preston stood up, smoothing his jacket, trying to look in control. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming on such short notice." Vance didn't shake his hand. He sat down in my grandmother's chair and looked around the messy office. "You look stressed, Preston. Cash flow problems." Preston laughed nervously. "Just a temporary hiccup. Asset-rich, cash poor. You know how it is. I have a massive injection of capital coming next week, but I need a bridge loan for the event tonight. $5 million. Vance raised an eyebrow. $5 million. That is a heavy bridge, Preston. And looking at your current situation with the IRS sniffing around, I would say the structural integrity of that bridge is questionable." "I will pay you back double," Preston said quickly. $10 million. Next week. Once the investors see the gala, they will be throwing money at me." Vance tapped his fingers on the desk. "I am sure they will. But Apex Capital requires collateral. Tangible collateral. And since the hotel is currently under federal scrutiny, we can't accept business assets." Preston froze. He had nothing left. The cars were leased. The accounts were frozen. "What do you have?" Preston Vance asked softly. "What do you own free and clear?" I saw Preston's eyes dart to the family portrait on the wall. The picture of him and my mother standing in front of her house. The house my father had built. The house where I took my first steps. It was a beautiful brownstone in Gold Coast, paid off years ago. It was Valerie's pride and joy. Preston walked to the safe in the corner. He spun the dial. My stomach tightened. I knew what was in there. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. The deed to the house. And the title to the vintage Mercedes convertible my mother loved more than she loved me. "This," he said, placing the documents on the desk. "The house is valued at $4 million. The car is another $100,000, and I have a few watches in here worth $50." Vance picked up the deed. He read the name. "Valerie Brooks. This is your wife's property. Does she know you are leveraging her home for a party?" Preston didn't even blink. "Of course she knows. We are partners. She trusts me completely. She wants this gala to succeed as much as I do." Liar. I screamed the word at my laptop screen. My mother didn't know. She was currently at the spa trying to relax before the big night, blissfully unaware that her husband was gambling away the roof over her head. Vance knew he was lying too. He didn't care. He pulled out a contract. Standard terms, he said. $5 million in cash wired within the hour, weekly interest of 10%. Default triggers immediate foreclosure and seizure of assets. Sign here. Preston grabbed the pen. He didn't read the terms. He didn't think about the fact that 10% weekly interest was insanity. He just saw the $5 million. He saw the lifeline. He signed his name. Then he forged my mother's signature next to it. He did it without hesitation. A smooth, practiced motion. Done, Preston said, shoving the papers back to Vance. Wire the money. Vance stood up, tucking the deed to my childhood home into his jacket pocket. Pleasure doing business, Preston. Enjoy your party. I will be watching. As the door closed, Preston collapsed into the chair. He put his head in his hands. He looked like a man who had just sold his soul and wasn't sure he got a good price. I sat back in my chair. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from clarity. He had done it. He had crossed the final line. Stealing the hotel was greed. Trying to frame me was malice. But stealing his wife's home, forging her signature, and risking her future for his own ego, that was unforgivable. I picked up my phone. I sent a text to Mr. Henderson. He took the bait. He signed the personal guarantee with the bank, and now he has collateralized the house with a loan shark. He is leveraged to the hilt. Mr. Henderson replied instantly. The trap is sprung. Are you ready for tonight? I walked over to the closet. I pulled down the zipper of the garment bag. The red dress shimmered in the dim light of the apartment. It was a weapon made of silk. I am ready, I typed back. I looked at the screen one last time. Preston was now on the phone, shouting at the caterers, telling them to upgrade the menu to lobster and caviar. He was spending the money he had just stolen from his wife. Dance while you can, Preston, I whispered. Because when the music stops tonight, you won't just be broke. You will be homeless, you will be divorced, and you will be going to prison. I closed the laptop. I went to the shower. I needed to wash off the filth of watching him. I needed to scrub my skin until it was raw. Tonight was the rebirth gala. He called it a rebirth. I called it a funeral. And I was going to be the one delivering the eulogy. It is time. The grand ballroom of the hotel had transformed. What used to be a warm space filled with mahogany and deep velvet was now a blinding landscape of white. White roses, white tablecloths, white chair covers. Preston had spent the $5 million he borrowed from the loan shark to scrub every ounce of color from the room. It looked expensive, it looked pristine, and it felt completely dead. I stood outside the heavy double doors, listening to the muffled sound of applause. My heart should have been racing. I should have been terrified. Instead, my pulse was slow and steady, like a drumbeat before an execution. I looked down at my reflection in the brass handle of the door. The red silk dress hugged my body like a second skin. It was a deep crimson, the color of fresh blood, the color of anger, the color of life. It had a slit up the thigh and a neckline that plunged just enough to be dangerous. I wasn't wearing the pearls my mother gave me. I was wearing gold. Heavy, solid gold hoops that caught the light. I checked my purse one last time. The VIP invitation was there. The file from the IRS was there. I signaled to the doorman. He was new. One of the staff Preston had hired to replace the old crew. He looked me up and down, his eyes widening at the dress, but he didn't stop me. He opened the door. The air inside was freezing. Preston had cranked the AC to compensate for the crowd, but it just made the room feel like a mausoleum. 500 heads turned. The silence that fell over the room was instant and absolute. It rippled from the back of the room all the way to the stage. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Champagne glasses froze in midair. I stepped onto the white marble floor. My gold stiletto heels clicked against the stone. Click, click, click. The sound echoed in the cavernous room louder than the jazz band that had just stopped playing. I didn't look at the guests. I looked straight ahead at the stage. Preston was standing at the podium. He was mid-sentence. He was wearing a white tuxedo looking like a plantation owner from a bad movie. His face, which had been flushed with triumph a second ago, drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. A ghost in a red dress. I started walking. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a woman who owns the floor she is standing on. The crowd parted for me. I saw the mayor sitting at table 1. He looked confused, whispering to his aide. I saw Mrs. van der Hoven, who had checked out yesterday, sitting at a table in the back, looking surprised to see me. Preston must have begged her to come back, probably promised her a free year of stays. I saw my mother. Valerie was sitting at the head table next to the empty seat where Preston had been. She was wearing a pale beige gown that blended into the tablecloth. When she saw me, her hand flew to her throat. Her eyes were wide with terror. She shook her head slightly, mouthing the word, "Go." I didn't stop. I kept walking down the center aisle, the Red Sea parting. Preston gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He leaned into the microphone. "Security," he croaked. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder, trying to sound authoritative. "Security. Please escort this woman out. She is a disgruntled former employee crashing a private event." 2 large security guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows near the stage. They started moving toward me. The room buzzed with whispers. "Is that the stepdaughter? The thief? The one from the news?" I didn't flinch. I didn't stop walking until I was 10 feet from the stage, right in the center of the spotlight. One of the guards reached for my arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." I stopped. I turned my head slowly and looked at the guard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just reached into my clutch and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. "I am not crashing," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I am a VIP guest. Table 1. The guard hesitated. He looked at the invitation. It was real. It was one of the special invites Preston had sent to the top-tier investors, the ones who had contributed more than $1 million. Preston shouted from the stage, his composure shattering. "It is a fake. She stole it. Throw her out." I looked up at Preston. He was sweating now under the stage lights. The makeup he was wearing was starting to run. "It is not fake, Preston," I said, "and I didn't steal it. It belongs to the holder of the promissory note for $5 million issued by Apex Capital Solutions." Preston froze. His eyes darted around the room looking for Silas Vance, the loan shark. Silas was sitting at table 3 sipping champagne. He raised his glass to me with a little smirk. He had sold me the debt. Or rather, he had sold the debt to the anonymous investor Mr. Henderson represented just an hour ago. Vance didn't care who paid him as long as he got his money, plus interest. And I had used the last of my trust fund access, the one Grandma unlocked this morning, to buy Preston's debt. "I am not here as your daughter, Preston," I continued, stepping closer to the stage. "And I am not here as your employee." I held up the envelope. "I am here as your creditor. And according to the terms of the loan you signed on Wednesday, I own the right to inspect the collateral at any time." The crowd gasped. They didn't know the details, but they knew the smell of blood. They knew that something major was happening. Preston laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that made everyone uncomfortable. He looked at the mayor. He looked at the press. "This is a joke," he stammered. "A family prank. My stepdaughter has a dramatic sense of humor. Ladies and gentlemen, please ignore her." He signaled the band. Play something loud." The band hesitated. The drummer looked at me. He was one of the new hires, but he saw the way I stood there. He saw the fire in my eyes. He put his sticks down. No one played a note. "You can't play over the truth, Preston," I said. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The security guards didn't stop me. They were confused. They looked from Preston to me and decided that the woman in the red dress looked more like the boss than the sweating man in the white tuxedo. I reached the podium. Preston backed away as if I were radioactive. "Get away from me," he hissed off mic. "You are ruining everything. I will kill you." I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out at the sea of white faces. I saw the cameras flashing. I saw the red recording lights of the news crews. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, rich and steady. "My name is Amara Brooks. My grandmother Estelle Robinson built this hotel 50 years ago as a safe haven for people who were turned away everywhere else." I turned to look at Preston. He was trembling, shaking his head, pleading with his eyes. "Tonight, Mr. Preston Miller has invited you here to celebrate a rebirth. He told you he was elevating the neighborhood. He told you he was bringing civilization to the South Side." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But you cannot build a future by painting over the past. And you certainly cannot build a business on stolen land and stolen money." Preston lunged for the microphone. "Cut it!" he screamed. "Cut the sound!" But the sound engineer was a young kid from the neighborhood. He had seen the mural being painted over. He left the fader up. Preston grabbed my arm, trying to shove me away. It was a mistake. The moment he touched me, I didn't stumble. I stood my ground. And the image of a white man in a tuxedo physically assaulting a black woman in a red dress on stage in front of the mayor of Chicago, that was the image that would end him. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. The room erupted. "Get your hands off her," someone shouted from the back. It was Chef Jefferson. He had snuck in through the kitchen. Preston let go, realizing what he had done. He held up his hands, backing away. She provoked me. She is crazy." I smoothed my dress. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "I am not crazy, Preston. I am just checking out." I pointed to the back of the room. The double doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a guest. 6 men in windbreakers walked in. On the back of their jackets were 3 yellow letters that make every business owner in America tremble. IRS. And walking behind them, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers, was Mr. Henderson holding a briefcase. Preston looked at the doors. He looked at me. He looked at my mother, who had buried her face in her hands. The music hadn't stopped. It had never started. But the dance was over. I stepped back from the microphone and gestured toward the agents. "I believe these gentlemen have a reservation," I said. Preston's knees gave out. He grabbed the podium to stop himself from falling. And as the agents marched down the aisle toward the stage, stepping in time with the clicking of my heels, I leaned in and whispered in Preston's ear, so only he could hear, "Happy birthday to me." The arrival of the federal agents had sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. The music had stopped. The chatter had ceased. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow breathing of the man standing next to me. Preston looked like he was having a cardiac event. His eyes were darting from the agents to the exits to his wife, and finally to me. He grabbed my arm again, his fingers digging into my skin. "Tell them to leave," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "Tell them this is a mistake, Amara. I am the CEO. I am the owner. You can't do this to me." I pulled my arm away slowly, deliberately, as if brushing off a speck of dust. I didn't whisper. I leaned into the microphone so my voice filled every corner of the room. "You are the owner of the building, Preston," I said clearly. "That is true. You tricked my mother. You manipulated the courts. You secured the deed to the physical structure of the Preston Grand, formerly known as the Royal Savoy." Preston straightened up slightly, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "Exactly," he stammered, addressing the crowd. "I own the building. I have the deed right here in my safe. These agents have no right to interrupt a private event." I smiled. It was the smile my grandmother used to give me when I was learning to play chess, and I moved my queen into a trap. "You own the bricks, Preston," I continued. "You own the mortar. You own the drywall you just painted and the marble floors you just polished. You own the elevators and the chandeliers. But there is one thing you forgot to check. One very important detail that my grandfather buried in the paperwork 40 years ago. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the second document. It was old. The paper was yellowed at the edges. "This is the original land trust agreement from 1985, I announced, holding it up for the cameras. Preston stared at it. "What are you talking about?" I turned to the audience. In the city of Chicago, commercial real estate law allows for the separation of ground rights and improvement rights. My grandfather knew that businesses can fail. He knew that people like Preston exist. So he never put the land in the company name. He placed the land, the actual dirt we are standing on right now, into the Estelle Robinson Land Trust. I looked at Preston. His face was gray. "I am the sole beneficiary of that trust, Preston. I don't own the hotel, I own the earth beneath it." Preston laughed nervously. "So what? So I pay you rent? Big deal. I have $50 million. I will write you a check for the ground lease right now." "How much is it?" $10,000 a month. 20. I shook my head. "You can't pay the rent, Preston." "Why not?" he shouted, losing his temper again. Because I opened the document to the last page. Because the 99-year ground lease between the trust and the operating company expired yesterday at midnight. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath from 500 people. Preston froze. "Expired." "Yes," I said. "And as the trustee, I have decided not to renew it." I dropped the bombshell with the precision of a surgeon cutting an artery. I turned back to the microphone, my voice hard as steel. "Which means, Mr. Preston Miller, that as of 24 hours ago, your company has been trespassing on private property. Your building is an unauthorized structure on my land." Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't just... The building is here. You can't move a skyscraper." "No," I agreed. "I can't. But I can invoke the surrender clause." I read from the yellowed paper. "Upon expiration of the ground lease, if the tenant fails to vacate or renew, the landlord reserves the right to take immediate possession of all improvements erected on the land, including all structures, fixtures, and attached assets, as compensation for the breach." I looked up. "In plain English, Preston, it means I don't just own the dirt anymore. Since you didn't renew the lease, I now own the bricks too. I own the mortar. I own your new marble floors. I own the chandeliers. And I own the office where you signed that fraudulent loan." Preston stumbled back, hitting the podium. No, that is impossible. My lawyers would have seen this." "Your lawyers were looking at the operating company," I said. "They weren't looking at the land records because you were too arrogant to pay for a full title search. You wanted to save money, Preston. You wanted to cut corners. Well, you just cut your own throat." I turned to the loan shark, Silas Vance, at table 3. "Mr. Vance," I said, "you hold a mortgage on the building as collateral for your $5 million loan, correct?" Vance nodded slowly, a look of impressed amusement on his face. "Well, I have bad news," I said. "You have a mortgage on a building that your borrower no longer owns." His collateral just evaporated. "The building belongs to the trust now, and the trust didn't sign your loan." Vance stood up. His smile vanished. He looked at Preston with eyes that promised violence. Preston looked at Vance, then back at me. He was hyperventilating. Sweat was pouring down his face, ruining his white collar. "You planned this," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You knew. You let me spend $5 million renovating your hotel. You let me paint it. You let me upgrade the HVAC. You let me increase the value of your property with my money." I stepped closer to him, invading his space. "I didn't let you do anything, Preston," I said coldly. "You stole it, remember? You kicked me out into the snow. You called me administrative fluff. You said I belonged in the kitchen." I gestured to the sparkling white room. "Thank you for the renovations, though. I admit the marble is nice. It will look beautiful when I strip your name off the door tomorrow morning. Preston sank to his knees. It wasn't a performance this time. His legs literally gave out. He looked at the IRS agents who were now standing at the foot of the stairs. He looked at the police. He realized the walls were closing in from every side. He had no building. He had no land. He had a $50 million tax bill he had personally guaranteed. He owed $5 million to a loan shark who was watching him like a hawk. And he had just been publicly humiliated in front of the entire city. My mother, Valerie, stood up from her chair. She looked at her husband kneeling on the floor. She looked at the ruin of the man she had sold her daughter out for. Preston looked up at her. "Val," he pleaded, his voice a broken whimper. "Val, do something. Talk to her. She is your daughter. Tell her to stop." Valerie looked at me. For a moment I saw a flicker of the mother she used to be. But then I saw the fear. She realized that if she stood by him now, she would go down with the ship. I didn't know," Valerie stammered, addressing the room, not him. "I didn't know about the land. I didn't know about any of this. He lied to me too." Preston's eyes went wide. You can't leave me, Val. I did this for us." Valerie turned her back on him. She sat back down, staring straight ahead, shaking. I looked down at Preston. He was alone. Truly alone. The IRS agents stepped onto the stage. "Mr. Miller," one of them said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, "we have a warrant for your arrest for tax fraud, wire fraud, and filing false financial statements." Preston didn't fight them. He couldn't. He was a shell of a man. As they pulled his arms behind his back, the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was louder than any applause he had ever received. I walked back to the microphone one last time. "The party is over," I said to the stunned crowd. "Please evacuate the building immediately. The new owner has a lot of cleaning up to do." I walked off the stage. I didn't look back at Preston as they dragged him away. I walked straight toward the kitchen. I had a promise to keep. Chef Jefferson was waiting and we had a menu to plan. The Royal Savoy was back in business, and this time it was built on solid ground. The silence in the ballroom shattered as Preston lunged toward me. His face was a mask of purple rage, veins bulging in his neck like cords. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had snapped shut on his leg. "You tricked me!" he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing through the speakers. "You set me up! I put $5 million into this building. That is my money. You can't just take it." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground in my red dress and looked him dead in the eye. "It wasn't your money, Preston," I said calmly into the microphone. "It was money you borrowed based on lies, and in the eyes of the federal government, that is not called investment. That is called bank fraud." Preston froze. The word fraud hung in the air like smoke. I pulled a small remote control from my clutch. I had rigged the presentation system earlier that day while the AV crew was on break. They thought I was just testing the microphones, but I was loading the ammunition. I pointed the remote at the massive LED screen behind the stage. The screen that was supposed to show a montage of Preston's achievements flickered and changed. A gasp went through the crowd. Projected on the screen in high definition was a document. It was the loan application Preston had submitted to Chase Bank on Monday morning. I had retrieved it from the server where he foolishly saved a digital copy. I walked over to the screen using it like a blackboard. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the stunned audience. "If you look at line 4, you will see that Mr. Miller claimed the current occupancy rate of the Preston Grand is 95%, with projected revenue of $10 million for the next quarter." I clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. It was the actual occupancy report from the hotel's internal system. The graph was a flat line at the bottom of the chart. "This is the real number," I said. 0%. As of yesterday, thanks to Mr. Miller's management style, every single guest had checked out. He lied to a federally insured bank to secure a $50 million line of credit. That is count 1. Preston was shaking his head frantically, looking at the investors in the front row. "It is a projection," he stammered. It is standard business practice. Everyone exaggerates a little. I clicked the remote again. A video played. It was the security footage from the office recorded just 3 hours ago. It showed Preston handing the forged deed to my mother's house to Silas Vance, the loan shark. And this, I continued, is Mr. Miller securing a bridge loan by using collateral he does not own. That is the deed to my mother's home, which he stole from her safe. He forged her signature. My mother, Valerie, let out a sob from the front table. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she watched her husband on the big screen signing her life away. That is forgery and wire fraud, Preston, I said. That is count 2 and 3. Preston looked at the screen, then at the crowd. He was sweating profusely now, the makeup running down his collar. He looked at the exits, but the doors were blocked. You hacked my computer, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. That is illegal. She is the criminal here. Arrest her. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. I didn't have to hack anything, Preston. You were using the guest Wi-Fi. And as the owner of the land and the network infrastructure, I have the right to monitor all traffic on my property. But I didn't just watch. I reported. I pointed to the back of the room where the men in windbreakers were waiting. I sent this entire file to the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division 4 weeks ago. I told them you were preparing to launder money. I told them about the tax evasion. I just waited for you to sign the papers to prove me right. The lead agent stepped forward. He was a tall man with a badge clipped to his belt. He walked down the center aisle with a heavy, deliberate stride. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing audible in the room. Preston Miller, the agent announced, his voice booming without a microphone. I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. Preston stumbled back, hitting the podium. No, wait, I can explain. Wait. It was her. She set me up. The agent didn't stop. He walked up the stairs to the stage, followed by 2 uniformed officers. They moved with practiced efficiency. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at the crowd. Their eyes were locked on Preston. Preston tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the back of the stage, tripping over a cable. He fell hard onto his hands and knees. Before he could get up, the officers were on him. Get your hands off me, he screamed, kicking and thrashing. Do you know who I am? I am a job creator. I am a pillar of this community. You have the right to remain silent, the agent said, pulling Preston's arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and metallic. Click, click, click. Preston was hauled to his feet. His white tuxedo was smudged with dust. His tie was crooked. He looked wild and broken. He looked out at the audience. He saw the cameras flashing, blinding him. He saw the mayor shaking his head and whispering to his security detail. He saw the investors checking their phones, calling their lawyers to distance themselves from him. Then he looked at me. Amara, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whimper. Please, tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will give it back. I will give you the hotel. I will give you everything. Just make them stop. I walked over to him. I stood close enough that I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. You have nothing to give, Preston, I said softly, so only he and the microphone could hear. The hotel is mine, the money is gone, and the house belongs to the bank now. You are bankrupt, you are homeless, and you are going to prison for 20 years. I reached out and plucked the white flower from his lapel. I crushed it in my hand and let the petals fall to the floor. Enjoy the view from the cell, I said. I hear the walls are a lovely shade of beige. Take him away, the agent ordered. Preston screamed as they dragged him across the stage. Val. Help me, Val. I looked at my mother. She was standing now. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had chosen over her own daughter. She saw him for what he truly was, a con artist, a thief, a weakling. She didn't move, she didn't speak. She just turned her head away, refusing to watch as he was marched down the stairs and out the side door. The heavy double doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his screams. The room was silent again. I stood alone on the stage in my red dress. The screen behind me went black. The show was over. The villain was gone. I looked out at the sea of faces. They looked terrified of me. Good. They should be. I tapped the microphone one last time. "The bar is open," I said, "and the drinks are on the house. But if you will excuse me, I have a hotel to run." I walked off the stage, my head held high. I didn't look for validation. I didn't look for applause. I had taken back my name. I had taken back my legacy, and I had done it without firing a single shot. As I walked past the press pit, a reporter shoved a microphone in my face. "Miss Brooks, how do you feel seeing your stepfather arrested?" I stopped. I looked into the camera lens. "I feel like the trash has finally been taken out," I said. And then I kept walking straight toward the kitchen where the real work was about to begin. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers had finally faded into the night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The grand ballroom was emptying out. The waiters were clearing away untouched glasses of champagne, and the white roses that Preston had spent a fortune on were already starting to wilt under the harsh stage lights. I stood near the entrance, watching the last of the guests scurry out to their cars, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. They didn't look at me, they were afraid of me. Good. Fear was a much better shield than kindness ever was. My mother Valerie was the last one left. She was sitting on a white velvet bench near the coat check. She looked small. The beige gown she wore, which had looked so elegant just hours ago, now washed her out, making her look like a ghost. She was staring at her phone, frantically tapping the screen. I knew who she was trying to call. Preston's lawyer. Her friends from the country club. Anyone who could tell her this was just a bad dream. But nobody was answering. I watched as a man in a gray windbreaker walked through the revolving doors. He wasn't a guest, and he wasn't police. He held a clipboard in his hand. He scanned the room, saw my mother, and walked straight toward her. "Valerie Brooks Miller," he asked, his voice flat and professional. My mother looked up. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Is there news about Preston? Is he okay?" The man didn't answer. He just handed her a thick stack of papers stapled together with a red cover sheet. "I am serving you with an order of immediate possession," he said. "The property located at 1240 Gold Coast Boulevard has been seized by Apex Capital Solutions as collateral for a defaulted loan." My mother froze. She stared at the paper as if it were written in an alien language. What she stammered. "No. That is my house. My father built that house. It is paid off." "Not anymore," the man said. "Mr. Miller signed the deed over on Wednesday. The default clause was triggered the moment he was arrested. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed." He turned and walked away, leaving her holding the wreckage of her life in her manicured hands. Valerie made a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a gasp, like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. She dropped the papers. They scattered across the marble floor, revealing the signature page where Preston had forged her name. She looked at the papers. Then she looked up and saw me. I was standing 10 feet away, watching her with my arms crossed over my red dress. I didn't move. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just watched. Her eyes locked onto mine. A flicker of hope ignited in them. A desperate, pathetic hope. "Amara," she cried out, scrambling to her feet. She ran toward me. She stumbled in her heels, almost falling, but she caught herself and threw herself at me. She grabbed my hands, her grip wet with sweat and tears. "Amara, thank God," she sobbed. "Did you hear him? Did you hear what that man said? Preston stole the house. He stole my house. I have nowhere to go." I stood rigid. I didn't pull away yet, but I didn't hug her back. I let her weep on my shoulder, feeling the expensive fabric of her dress dampen with her tears. "You have to help me, Amara," she pleaded, looking up at me. Her face was a ruin of panic. "You have the hotel back. You are rich again. You can buy the house back. You can fix this. We can fix this." "We," I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. "Yes, us. she said, nodding frantically. We are family. I am your mother. I was a victim too, Amara. You saw what he did. He lied to me. He forged my signature. I am innocent. I looked down at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes, and the woman who had watched her husband hand me a kitchen apron on my birthday and laughed. I pulled my hands away from her grip slowly and deliberately. You are not innocent, Mom, I said, my voice low and cold. You are just a bad gambler. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. Amara, how can you say that? He tricked me. He tricked you about the money, yes, I said, stepping back to create distance between us. But he didn't trick you into treating me like garbage. I pointed to the elevator. The same elevator she had shoved me toward just a few days ago. Do you remember Monday night, Mom? Do you remember when Preston told me to get out? Do you remember what you did? Valerie wiped her eyes, sniffing. I was scared, Amara. I had to support my husband. The Bible says, stop. I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare quote the Bible to me. You didn't support him because of scripture. You supported him because you loved the lifestyle he gave you. I took a step closer to her, my voice rising, slightly echoing in the empty lobby. You loved being the wife of a white businessman more than you loved being the mother of a black daughter. You loved the country club dinners where they tolerated you because of him. You loved the feeling of being superior to your own people. Amara, please, she begged, reaching for me again. Don't do this. I am homeless. I have nothing. I dodged her hand. You had a daughter, I said. You had a daughter who worked 18 hours a day to build your legacy. You had a daughter who begged you to open your eyes for 3 years. But when it came down to a choice between me and your status, you chose the status. I remembered the cold wind on my face when I walked out of the penthouse. I remembered the shame of the police dragging me out of the motel. I remembered waiting for her in the jail cell, waiting for a visit that never came. You threw my suitcase into the snow. Mom, I said, my voice breaking just a little, but hardening instantly. You locked my bank accounts. You watched the news report calling me a thief, and you stood next to him and nodded. You didn't care if I went to prison as long as you got to keep your penthouse view. Valerie fell to her knees. It was a mirror image of Preston's collapse, but it didn't move me. It only disgusted me. I am sorry, she wailed, burying her face in the marble floor. I am so sorry, Amara. Please, I am your mother. Don't leave me on the street. I looked down at her. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the ghost of the love I used to have for her. But I strangled it. I had to. If I let her back in, she would just sell me out again the next time a man with a checkbook came along. I signaled to the security guard. It was Marcus, one of the old crew I had rehired that afternoon. He walked over, his face stony. Get her up, I said. Marcus gently lifted Valerie to her feet. She hung limp in his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Escort Mrs. Miller off the property, I ordered. And make sure she doesn't come back. Valerie looked at me one last time. Her eyes were hollow. Amara, please. Where will I go? I don't know, Mom, I said, turning my back on her. You have 24 hours before the bank takes the house. I suggest you start packing, but... And Mom, I added over my shoulder, don't worry about the apron you gave me for my birthday. I kept it. It reminds me of exactly where I stand in this family. I heard her wail as Marcus led her toward the revolving doors. I heard the whoosh of the glass spinning, and then silence. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty lobby. The white roses were dead. The champagne was flat. My mother was gone. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like freedom. I wasn't an orphan. I was a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I walked to the front desk where the night manager was watching me with wide eyes. Mr. Thompson, I said, smoothing my red dress. Yes, Miss Brooks. Cancel the order for the beige paint, I said, and call the artist collective. Tell them I want the mural back. And tell them to make it bigger, brighter, and blacker. Yes, ma'am, he said, smiling. I walked toward the elevator to go up to my penthouse. My home, my empire. The war was over, and I had won. The silence in the executive office was the first thing I noticed. For the past week, it had been filled with Preston's shouting and the frantic ringing of phones. Now the only sound was the hum of the server room and the scratching of my pen against paper. It had been 7 days since the gala. 7 days since the police dragged my stepfather off the stage in front of the entire city. The fallout had been swift and brutal. The federal prosecutor didn't waste any time. Given the mountain of evidence I provided, including the forged deed to my mother's house and the recorded confession of tax fraud, Preston was denied bail. The legal analysts on the news were predicting a 20-year sentence. He had wanted to be famous, and he finally got his wish, just not the way he intended. But while Preston was sitting in a 6x8 cell, trading his Italian suits for an orange jumpsuit, I had work to do. The Preston Grand Management Company, the shell entity he had used to try and steal my legacy, filed for immediate bankruptcy 48 hours after his arrest. Chase Bank was left holding a $50 million toxic asset that they couldn't operate because they had no lease for the land. They were desperate. They were bleeding money. So I did them a favor. I walked into the bank on Friday morning and offered to buy the operating company's assets for pennies on the dollar. The bank manager looked relieved just to get it off his books. I signed the check using a fraction of the trust fund money Grandma had saved for me. It was the most satisfying transaction of my life. With that one signature, I reunited the land and the building. The schism was healed. The Royal Savoy was whole again. The first call I made wasn't to a contractor or a decorator, it was to Chef Jefferson. I told him to sharpen his knives because the kitchen was open. He didn't just come back alone. He brought the entire crew with him. The line cooks, the dishwashers, the servers who had been fired for not being polished enough. When I walked into the kitchen on Monday morning, the sterile smell of the French fusion menu was gone. It was replaced by the rich, spicy aroma of slow-cooked gumbo and fresh cornbread. The kitchen was loud again, filled with laughter and the clatter of pans. Chef Jefferson walked up to me and handed me a bowl of shrimp and grits. "Welcome home, boss," he said. I took a bite and almost cried. It tasted like childhood. It tasted like victory. In the lobby, the restoration was messy but necessary. We hired a team of art restorers to carefully strip away the layers of beige paint Preston had slapped over the walls. It was slow, delicate work. But as the solvents dissolved the generic paint, the vibrant colors of the original mural began to emerge. First the blues of the Jazz Age, then the golds of the Civil Rights Movement. When the face of Dr. King was finally revealed looking out over the lobby unharmed, the housekeeping staff broke into applause. We weren't just removing paint, we were scrubbing away a stain on our history. By Wednesday evening, the physical transformation was complete. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, wrapped in a thick wool coat, watching the workmen finish the installation above the main entrance. The tacky gold script of the Preston Grand was lying in a dumpster in the alley where it belonged. I pulled my phone out and called the maintenance room. "Hit it," I said. There was an electrical buzz, and then the neon tubes flickered to life. First the R, then the O, then the entire name blazing in magnificent royal purple against the dark Chicago sky. The Royal Savoy. Cars slowed down as they passed, honking their horns. People on the street stopped and pointed, smiling. The beacon was back. The heartbeat of the South Side was pumping again. I looked up at the sign and felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The hotel wasn't just a building anymore. It was a fortress. It had survived segregation. It had survived recessions. And now it had survived Preston Miller. I turned and walked through the revolving doors, ready to get back to work. "My name is Amara Brooks, and this is my hotel." The elevator ride to the roof was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of that terrible birthday dinner 2 weeks ago. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that exists between two people who don't need words to understand each other. I stood behind my grandmother's wheelchair, watching the numbers climb. We were going past the penthouse where Preston had thrown me out, past the guest rooms where Mrs. Vanderhoven was currently sleeping in a suite filled with hot water and Egyptian cotton sheets. We were going to the very top. The doors slid open and the cold Chicago wind hit us. But tonight it didn't feel biting. It felt crisp and clean. I pushed Grandma Estelle out onto the observation deck. From here you could see the whole city. The grid of lights stretching out endlessly, the headlights of cars moving like blood through the veins of the streets, and the dark expanse of Lake Michigan to the east. I locked the brakes on her chair and wrapped a cashmere blanket around her shoulders. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the city she had helped build. "It is beautiful, isn't it, Amara?" she said softly. "It is, Grandma," I answered, leaning against the railing. "It is finally ours again." Grandma chuckled, a low, raspy sound that shook her small frame. She reached up and patted my hand. "It was always ours, child. I just needed you to realize it." I looked down at her. She didn't look like the confused old woman she had played in front of Preston. Her eyes were sharp and clear, reflecting the neon purple glow of the new Royal Savoy sign above us. "You took a big risk, Grandma," I said. "You let him humiliate us. You let him paint over Dr. King. You let him almost bankrupt the company. What if I hadn't figured out the land trust? What if I had given up?" Grandma turned her head to look at me. Her expression was fierce. "I knew you wouldn't give up. I watched you grow up, Amara. You have your grandfather's stubbornness and my patience. That is a dangerous combination." She looked back out at the skyline. Besides, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "You can't renovate a house that has termites in the foundation, Amara. If you just paint over them, they will keep eating the wood from the inside. Sometimes the only way to save the castle is to let the rats think they have conquered it. You let them eat until they are fat and slow and confident. You let them expose themselves. And then when they least expect it, you bring the hammer down." I shivered. It wasn't from the cold. It was from the realization of just how strategic she had been. She had sacrificed her dignity for months playing the senile old woman just to give Preston enough rope to hang himself. She had taught me the ultimate lesson in business. True power isn't about being loud, it is about being patient. "I am sorry about Mom," I said quietly. The words hung in the air. Grandma sighed. It was a sad, heavy sound. "Your mother made her choice, Amara. She chose a man who promised her gold over a daughter who gave her loyalty. It breaks my heart, but you cannot save people who do not want to be saved. You can only protect yourself from drowning with them." We stood there for a long time watching the city breathe. I thought about the girl I was 2 weeks ago, the girl in the green dress who was afraid to speak up. The girl who let her stepfather call her administrative fluff. That girl felt like a stranger now. I had walked through fire and I had come out made of steel. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a name. Mom. I stared at it. I knew where she was. Mr. Henderson had told me. She was at a women's temporary shelter on the west side. The bank had taken the house that morning. Preston was in federal holding. She was alone, sleeping on a cot surrounded by strangers, probably wearing the same beige gown she had worn to the gala because it was the only thing she had left. The phone kept buzzing. It vibrated against my palm like a frantic heartbeat. I could answer. I could send a car for her. I could bring her here, put her in a suite, and let her cry on my shoulder. It would be the easy thing to do. It would be what a good daughter is supposed to do. But then I remembered the suitcase in the snow. I remembered the way she looked at me when the police dragged me away. I remembered that she was perfectly happy to watch me burn as long as she was warm. If I answered, I would be inviting the termites back into the foundation. Grandma didn't look at the phone. She just watched me waiting. I took a deep breath. The air was cold and empowering. "I am not a victim," I whispered to myself. "I am a CEO." I didn't slide to answer. I tapped the small icon in the corner. Block caller. The buzzing stopped instantly. The screen went dark. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. It was the lightness of dropping a heavy weight I had been carrying for 32 years. I grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. Ready to go down, Grandma? I asked. We have a breakfast meeting with the investors at 7. Grandma patted my hand again. Lead the way, boss, she said. I turned the chair around. As we walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I saw a woman in a red coat standing tall and unbowed. I saw the queen of an empire that had been tested by fire and built on solid ground. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, ready for business. The rats were gone. The castle was clean. And for the first time in the history of the Royal Savoy, the woman running it didn't answer to anyone but herself. This story serves as a powerful reminder that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by what you know you possess. Amara taught us that true power is not about being the loudest person in the room, but about knowing the facts, owning your leverage, and having the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. It teaches us that toxic family members do not deserve a seat at your table just because you share blood. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is block the number, protect your peace, and build your own empire on your own terms. If Amara's journey from scapegoat to CEO resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know, have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below, because your experience might just be the survival guide someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for watching, and remember to always read the fine print.